Okay. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS Office Hours. I'm coming at you from a slightly different angle than previously. I've been moving things around here a bit, and I also had some hardware problems, so I'm waiting for some replacements, but at least we're back with Office Hours. So we missed last week because I was dead tired. This week I'm not dead tired, so it's good to be back. Anyways, nice to see so many people here. Yeah, so if you're new to Office Hours, what we do here every Friday, we just talk about Serenity OS. So if you have any questions, technical, non-technical, it's all good. Just ask and we'll talk about it. And if somebody has like specific questions about something they're working on, this is a pretty good time to dig into stuff. But really, it's open to you what we talk about. So getting a bunch of nice messages here in the chat. Hello, everybody. Hello, Supernova, Ria, Sintels, Jecha, Sophia, Elise, Hubris, Fred, Undefined, and Linus. That's a whole bunch of people. Jorik asks, does Serenity have something like XCell? How is it implemented? I don't know what that is. What is XCell? XCell is a command line program for getting and suspense the X selection. Okay, so I guess we have copy and paste commands. So let me show you those. I have a new keyboard, so my fingers are one step to the left from what I'm used to. That's a bit weird. So we have this command where you can copy something by piping into copy. And now if I try to paste, it will paste hello. But you can also use paste to paste whatever is on the clipboard. So I don't know if that is what XCell does. That's just from me doing the most cursory exam of that description ever. But yeah, we have copy and paste commands. Those were added by Sergey a long time ago, and I think they're quite neat. Let's see. Lucas says, I hope you all drank enough this day. Stay hydrated. That is good advice. I have been drinking maybe 6 or 7 teas, I feel like. Maybe a few too many, but it's all good. Yeppy Dev says, have you moved your chair to somewhere else? Yes, I have moved my whole setup 90 degrees because this week somebody came in to look at the ventilation in this room. So basically they came here to check out that there's enough oxygen coming in and out and measuring stuff like that, and turns out everything's just fine. But to give them access to the ventilation, I just moved everything around, and now I ended up liking how that turned out. So now I'm just sitting in this other direction. I do have to do something about the backdrop because it's a little bit depressing, but you can see here my acoustic foam, which is hopefully picking up some of the echo. And I have the same kind of stuff on the other walls as well. Let's see. Hubris Inc. says, what are the keyboard shortcuts for dragging and rescaling windows? Also, is middle click paste implemented? So we don't have middle click paste. And if you want to drag a window, just hold the super key or the Windows key on your keyboard and left mouse to drag around. To resize, again, super or Windows key and right mouse button to resize. That's fairly intuitive once you know what the shortcut is. Jorik says, does Serenity use X11 protocol? No, we do not use the X11 protocol. It's all custom. Oh, hold on. There we go. It's all custom and made for Serenity. There is some inspiration from X11, obviously, and all sort of asynchronous windowing systems, but it's not X11 compatible in any way. So it's the same as everything else in Serenity, really. Like, we build our own versions of everything that we want. We don't go outside and take an existing solution, because that's not fun. And ultimately, we just want to have fun. So we try to make everything ourselves. Frederick says, show off the new keyboard. Well, I have to be honest with you, there's a bit of a cable tangle on my desk, so I don't want to pull it up too much, but it sounds like this. And let me show you what it's called. I think it was 280. Yeah, this guy right here. And it was actually one of the cheaper keyboards that I could find, but everybody in reviews said this is the quietest keyboard ever. And none of the sales copy even talks about how quiet it is, but I have to say it is very quiet, and quiet keyboard is like the #1 thing I'm looking for. So I'm really happy with this purchase. I had been using a much more fancy and expensive keyboard before, but I'm really happy that I found this, because now it means I can get a keyboard at a quarter of the price of what I was paying previously. So yeah, it's a Logitech K280E, nothing fancy at all. Timo has that keyboard. It's a nice keyboard, right? I mean, I'm still getting used to it, but it is, I find it's just so quiet. That is really nice. Let's see. Sophia says, I recently learned about CSS nesting, and I like it a lot. Mainstream browsers don't implement it yet, but I wonder if maybe Serenity is working on it. CSS nesting. Nesting. Okay, here we go. Keyboard troubles, finding the keys. This is not something that we have implemented yet. It's looks very new. The ability to nest one style rule inside another with the selector of the child rule relative to the selector of the parent rule. Oh, interesting. Okay. This is like nested rules. Rules within rules. This is kind of spicy. We have not, we don't support this yet. It's certainly something we could support if somebody felt like implementing it. It would be a bit of parser work and then a bit of work on the selector engine, but it looks, I mean, just from like skimming through these examples, it looks extremely doable. Like nothing in particular seems crazy hard to do. In many ways, we're actually in a good spot right now for doing stuff like this, because we don't have huge amounts of optimizations in our CSS engine yet. If we had a highly optimized engine, doing this kind of stuff would be very likely to break optimizations, right? But because our engine is so naive, you could sort of build something like this and not have too much trouble with optimizations. So yeah, I don't know exactly what the status of this is. We should look at, I guess, can I use nesting? What did they say about that? CSS nesting, can I use it? How do you even read this? Not supported. I see. Yeah, mainstream browsers don't implement it yet, as you say. But if somebody wanted to work on this, it would absolutely be doable. It could be much like how the JavaScript temporal proposal came out, and we sort of jumped on it, and I think we have the most complete implementation at the moment. Although I'm not fully sure about that, but we definitely rushed into it. And it's could be the same thing with this, right? Like, there's no reason we couldn't implement this if it looks like something that's going to happen. Let's see. Synthels says, does SerenityOS have any GPU acceleration? If this is a stupid question, I haven't been following developments. It's not a stupid question. So we don't have by default any particular GPU acceleration. Although there has been some work in the queue recently I haven't, let's see, VirGL, yeah. So Sahan here has been working on supporting the, I guess, the virtualized GL acceleration that you can get from QEMU. And but it only works if you're running on a Linux host, right? So, but it would be sort of a stepping stone to getting getting some kind of architecture for accelerated graphics into our system, and then it would be much easier to plug in hardware drivers for real cards down the line if we've already established sort of a software architecture for how to use acceleration in our system at that point. At the moment, our system is just kind of based around software rendering everywhere in the stack. There are some concepts that will benefit from hardware accelerations, but they aren't implemented sort of in hardware acceleration terms. So there's a lot of work to do there. But this is interesting already, right? So what you're seeing here is, I guess, a demo of QEMU assisted virtualized GPU access. So Serenity is using the host GPU via a virtualization abstraction layer. Let's see, Jeje says, I have to give up on the stream, old computer on the train with spotty internet connection. Yeah, I was running trains last week, trying to use internet in the same country as you, and yeah, it was a real hassle. Samuel says, how long do you plan on working on SerenityOS? Well, I don't really have a plan. I know this may surprise you, Samuel, but I believe we've talked about this before. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to work on it forever until I die. And if I don't do that, then we'll see what happens then. But that is sort of my attitude towards it, because it covers everything that I enjoy about computers. So there's no reason for me to not do it. And the scope of the project is so wide that there's always going to be something fun to do. So I like to think that I've set myself up pretty well here to have something to do for the rest of my life. Let's see, SoulCloud says, hi, can you please do quick review / roast of my project? You want me to roast your GitHub project? All right, let's take a look. Nice OS. See, it already sounds nice. A Linux OS that one person can manage. Nice. All right. So it's an operating system with a vanilla Linux kernel for users who want to take full control of their system. You can do it. Try it. All right. So I'm not sure exactly what is the difference between this and the 10,000 other Linux distributions that exist. And I don't know how to evaluate that. So I'll just say that your repository looks fairly clean. The name is clearly nice, a little bit catchy, nice OS. But I'm not really qualified to evaluate a Linux distribution one way or the other. I just use Ubuntu and try not to think about my Linux distribution because I'm not really interested in what it's doing. I just wanted to stay up to date and work for my daily tasks. So if you have something here that's an alternative, that's great. If it requires me to do anything other than use the programs that come with it, I'm not personally interested, but maybe somebody else is. So check out SoulCloud Nice OS if you want to fiddle around with a new Linux distribution. Let's see. Elise says the CSS nesting module spec has been a long time coming. Will be nice indeed for those of us who don't want to run a preprocessor. I see. Okay, so it's kind of a lifting up to the spec level what SAS and stuff like that has been doing. That sounds good. I admit I am not the most prolific CSS author myself. I mostly make CSS for test cases. But it's always nice to see spec or platform features coming for the web that developers are excited about, and sort of taking stuff and putting it into the platform that people were previously doing with libraries. That always seems really nice to me. PH says, hey, longtime lurker, thanks for reviving my interest in C++ and operating systems. Wondering about running Serenity on a Raspberry Pi 4, do you know anything about current status and possible paths to it? And then Linus replied to that with a link to one of my tweets. All right, it's just a tweet of this picture here. So I think that's from Nico, who got some initial bootloader stuff up and going on Raspberry Pi 4. I don't know too much about the current status, but I know they have a channel on Discord where they're talking about ARch64 stuff. I think the kernel is sort of in a state where it builds, but it doesn't do very much. For anybody who's interested in that, though, do join the Discord channel about it and talk to those people if you want to help out. And I'm sure that somebody there can give you sort of quick orientation of what the status is. I personally don't have a Raspberry Pi. I'm not super interested in that sort of work, so I'm a little bit out of the loop on what's going on, but people there will know for sure. JJ says, I know I'm not that good at C++, but from reviewing the source code of the browser, I feel like I'm learning way more about how under the hood looks for web browsers. Well, that's good. Yeah, that's definitely something that I want to show people, is that you can totally understand how a browser works. It's not magic, and you can open up the source code of a web browser and poke around and make it do stuff. All the major engines are really huge, which can of course be intimidating, and that's one thing that makes the SerenityOS browser really cool at this moment, in that anybody who wants to can sit down and learn how it works. And I'd like to keep it that way as much as possible. I want it to be understandable by people, so that's actually sort of a driving design goal, I guess, to retain understandability and hackability and not sacrifice all of it for performance, like basically all the corporate browsers have ended up doing. I mean, that's not to say you can't understand how Blink or Gecko or WebKit works, just that it takes a considerably larger effort to engage with it just because of the sheer size of the whole thing. Le Futuriste says, I wonder if the trend to add more feature to the standardized CSS spec and doing the work of CSS preprocessor may diminish the performance. Well, usually, in general, if you tell a browser what you're trying to do, it can usually optimize better rather than worse, right? It's a bit like statically versus dynamically typed programming languages. If you tell a compiler what all the types are, then it can usually do a better job optimizing your code than if you just, if it's a dynamic language where it just has to guess what the types are and they may change at runtime. So that sort of ruins a lot of optimization opportunities. I like to imagine that it's similar with something like CSS, right? So if you communicate to the browser your intent, then the browser doesn't have to look at whatever the preprocessor thought would be the optimal format, but instead it can decide for itself what this stuff means and how to best make use of it, if that makes sense. Ecoptic says, hi Andreas, could you explain a little about processes and running processes in the operating system? I mean, sure, but what would you like to know? We can definitely talk about processes. So processes are a thing. If you use PF, you can see the process table. So these are all of our processes we have running on Serenity right now. Like any other Unix system, we have a PID. So that's the process ID. Every process has a unique PID. And within every process, you can have one or more threads. So every process has at least one thread that we commonly call the main thread, but you can create more threads if you want to parallelize execution within a process. And all of the threads within the process share the same memory address space. So you can use the same memory from multiple threads. And our scheduler in SerenityOS operates on a thread level granularity. So it's not scheduling processes, but rather scheduling threads and looking at thread priorities and thread execution queues. So when we're switching, sort of when the CPU is interrupted and told, okay, time to switch to some other task, it looks at the list of executable threads and picks the next one based on our scheduling algorithm. So processes are sort of I guess a slightly higher level execution unit. The thread is really the lowest level execution unit that we have. And I don't know exactly what you would like to know about them, but that's sort of what there is to know. I guess I would say that once all the threads in a process have exited, then the process will exit itself. But you can also one of the threads can tell the kernel that the whole process should exit, and then the kernel will just kill all the threads in the process simultaneously. But natural death occurs when all the threads stop executing within a process. Let's see. JJ. Oh, JJ is waving to Linus, saying, enjoy your videos on your channel. I also enjoy the videos on Linus's channel. In fact, let me take this opportunity to advertise to you my friend Linus's YouTube channel. Hashtag subscribe to Linus. Linus has recently also started making programming videos about SerenityOS, so I definitely recommend everybody subscribe to Linus and support what he's doing. I think it's awesome to have more people making content about SerenityOS, and he recently posted a video of running SerenityOS on bare metal on one of his machines, so that was pretty cool. And yeah, definitely check out his channel. Let's see. Weld says, hi Andreas, have you ever looked at the source code of Unreal Engine? How do you feel about that? I have not looked at the source code of the Unreal Engine, although I have looked at some game that used the Unreal Engine, but I don't have any feelings about that at all. In general, I don't have feelings about anything that I haven't used extensively. And even if I do have feelings, I know that those feelings are sort of uninformed and pointless to share, so I try to not do that. Thomas Q says, hi Andreas, have you stopped the hacking videos? No, absolutely not. Definitely more hacking videos coming sooner or later. I just, I had some other things to do this week, so I didn't end up posting any yet, but absolutely not stopping. Ecoptic says, there should be a rule that you shouldn't mention the word plan in chat. But it's okay. If people want to ask about the plan, I will happily tell them again and again that there is no plan. Jose Gamer says, hi from Portugal. Well, hi to you from Sweden. Geo says, what are some prerequisites in order to get involved with operating systems programming? I think, I don't know if there are any prerequisites other than programming experience. I think anybody who has 2 or more years of programming experience, like full-time programming experience, can engage with operating systems. But the more experience you have, the less frustrating operating systems will be. And I remember trying to learn about OS stuff when I was a teenager, and I was picking things up, but because of my low experience at the time, I had a very hard time being productive, and I spent most of my time just being frustrated and asking for help or trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. And when I started this SerenityOS project, it was I had learned a lot since then, right? Like I had more than a decade and a half of experience programming regularly at that point, so it was so much easier to just get going and be productive. So I think really I would say prerequisites, 2 years of programming experience, and then you can start doing OS stuff somewhat, at least. And then the more experience you have on top of that, of course, will make it easier and more fun for you. But if you find it so interesting that you don't want to do anything but operating systems, then yeah, of course, look into it. That's what I would say, I guess. JJ says, could I run SerenityOS in VirtualBox? I believe so. I know many people have done it, so I think it should be possible for sure. SoulCloud says, thank you for a nice review. Well, good luck with nice OS. Hashem says, every time I see you working on the web browser, I notice that there are a lot of layouting problems. Is pushing this aside a strategy you guys are following until more things elsewhere are implemented? Well, yes and no. I mean, I am actively working on layout issues, and other people are working on other things, but not everybody wants to work on layout. It seems like a fairly niche interest that only a few people have been interested in doing so far. And there's just a lot of, with CSS layout, there's just all these different specifications that sort of intersect in very complex ways. So if you change something to fix a bug somewhere, it's very, very often that ends up having a side effect somewhere else, and then you have to build a very, very strong mental model of not only how each individual specification works, but also how they intersect. And that can be quite, I guess, time-consuming, or it takes a lot of energy to engage with it. So I understand that it's not interesting to everybody, but it's not really the case that we're ignoring layout. It's just that there are a lot of layout issues, and it takes time to get to each one of them. So as an example, today I spent, I think, over an hour just making, let me see if I can make a test case. So I had a situation where it was something like this. Hello. Let's write some markup. All right. So we have a simple little thing here, and then I like to put borders around everything because it helps me see what's what. And maybe we should even do a thicker border. So I think, yeah, the thing I was looking at this morning was if you have a grandparent element that's floating, then when you float a div, it stops taking up all the available width, right? And instead it becomes shrink to fit. So float versus non-float div has very different width behavior. So for floating divs, it's supposed to be exactly the size that it takes to contain all of the content inside of the div, or inside of the floating element. So I think the issue I was looking at this morning for over an hour was that if you have padding on something here, on this element, then this padding was not affecting the width of the floated grandparent. So, and that was an interaction between the way we do text layout and the way we lay out block level floats. And just like reading the specs and figuring out which parts were not interacting correctly took me a long time. But once I knew what the solution was, or I knew what we were doing wrong, then it was just a one-line fix. But it's a lot of stuff like that with layout that you just have to sit and spend time understanding how the spec wants it to work. So yeah, that's what I was doing. So this morning, the box just ended right over here instead, and the hello was sort of on the right side of the box. So it looked maybe more like that, which was totally wrong, of course. Anyway, but we're not ignoring the layout problems. We're just working on many things in parallel. That's really what's going on. Ali says, sometimes I hope browsers were magic, then we wouldn't have to implement the painful parts. But it's fun to implement those parts, right? Night Cheese says, how far away do you think you are from using Serenity as your daily driver? I don't know. I really don't know. We'll see. Actually, we have been making some really interesting progress recently in the area of something that I really care about, which I tweeted about just earlier, which was that I was able to log into Lobsters, which is a link sharing community. And as you can see here, I'm logged in. And that, to me, is like a really big thing, because I want to, in order to use Serenity as my daily driver, I have to be able to use the web, right? And being able to log into sites and use them and post comments and things like that, instead of just using the browser to look at stuff, but not really being able to interact with anything, to me, that's a huge milestone towards daily driver usage, like serious daily driver usage, because the web needs to be interactive in the browser in order to be able to daily drive it, as far as I'm concerned. Robin with the super chat. Thank you very much, Robin. Robin asks, will you be doing more browser videos soon? Yes, I believe so. I have a bunch of topics that I would like to do videos about. The last couple of days, I have been just sitting here working on layout issues, and I don't know, at no moment did it feel like, wow, this would be an interesting video, because I was spending so much time just sitting here reading specifications and struggling to understand, rather than like actively programming or actively doing anything really. So I didn't get that spark of feeling like, oh, I should make a video about this. But I have a lot of things I want to make videos about, so there should be more coming sooner or later, for sure. Thank you for the super chat again. Salvo says, quite disappointed at Netflix for not having yet proposed to include the Discord support saga in their catalog. Ah, yes. Well, you can watch it for free on YouTube, so it's all good. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Dave says, on browsers that didn't try to optimize the scripts, for example, IE below 8, you had to optimize almost everything to get good performance. Today, I don't have to worry so much. Ah, well, just wait until you try to run your site on the SerenityOS browser, which is very unoptimized. No, but I think I agree that a browser is basically a virtual machine, right? For a very complicated machine, which is the web. And it really is the job of the browser to emulate that machine as well as possible. I don't think it's, from my perspective, it's better if the content is really expressive, rather than sort of trying to do hacks in the content to improve performance. I would prefer that the browser does the fancy hacks to improve performance. Let's see. Supernova says, how is video support in SerenityOS? Because I noticed I wasn't able to play MP4 files. We don't really have any video support yet. So there has been some work on VP9 decoder, I think, but I don't know if it ever got to the point where it can play a file. Definitely an area where there's room for improvement. Ashwin says, hi Andreas, how are you? I am pretty good. How are you? Let's see. Prajwal says, do you read a lot of computer science books for theoretical knowledge before implementing something? No, not really. I don't read computer science books It's been a long time since I read a book that wasn't fiction, but I did read books when I was younger, less experienced, but nowadays I find it easier to learn new things by doing them rather than by reading about them. So I just want to get my hands on stuff as fast as possible so I can learn interactively rather than passively. Let's see. Ashwin says, can you explain a little bit about setting up a cross compiler for OS dev? I don't think there's anything I can meaningfully say that isn't already explained on the OS dev wiki. They have a lot of content about that. So maybe start with this page right here. Why do I need a cross compiler? And then I think hopefully you'll be able to divine from that what you need to know. Dave says, you mentioned in a previous Q&A that you were going to look into IOC and dependency injection. If so, what was your take? I don't think I ended up looking into that in any greater depth, so I still don't have a take. Sorry about that, I totally forgot. Alex says, how does the scheduler handle the condition where most processes are blocked? Does it go into a power-saving sleep, or does it essentially while one? So we halt the CPU. That's basically what we do. So if there is no executable thread at the moment, we just switch to our idle thread. And I think you can see it right here. It's PID0. It's cheekily called the kernel thread. Get it? And this thing, the kernel, only has a single instruction in it, which is just a halt instruction. So whenever you switch to that, it will just halt in a loop. So it's not true that it has a single instruction. It has a loop that just halts. I'll show you what it looks like, actually. What is it? Idle thread? Where is it? Oh, idle loop is what it's called. Yeah, so it's more than a single instruction, but it's a loop where we idle. And we idle by halting the CPU. And there's definitely more we could do to put the CPU to fancier sleep and things like that. But at the moment, that's what we have. So we're not just burning the CPU, we are halting it. And then if you're familiar with how halt works, the CPU goes to sleep until there's an interrupt request. So you get an IRQ, you wake back up, service the IRQ, and eventually that will unblock some thread that can then take over execution. Daniel says, my personal plan is to continue shaving every yak I can find. Yeah. I guess it's more of a strategy than a plan, but yeah, I guess you could call it a plan. That's kind of what I do as well. I also enjoy just shaving random yaks and seeing where it takes me. Triangles says, the book 3 Easy Pieces gives a really nice overview of what an operating system does, in my opinion. 3 Easy Pieces. I have not read that. I've seen it talked about. So what's in it? Browser. There's nothing here about browsers, so it's not really an operating system as far as I'm concerned until it has a browser. But I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. So I will link it in the chat. I'm sure it has a lot of valuable information. Maybe I should look at it sometime. Okay, Omni with the super chat. Thank you very much, Omni. Omni says, what is your opinion on the singleton pattern? C++ core guidelines recommends to avoid singleton. Is a singleton good or bad? So I don't really think any particular programming pattern is good or bad. There is a time and a place for most of them. Personally, I like using the singleton pattern. We use it extensively in SerenityOS. If you search for the, then we have a lot of those. And the is the go-to name that we use for our singleton instances. So I don't know. In general, I'm not a fan of making these big sweeping judgments that like this pattern is bad, this pattern is good, because if you look historically, then those things are essentially trends, and trends just change. So if you get swept up in following the trends, then you always have to stay on top of it. And the things that are good today are going to be bad tomorrow and so on. And I find that it's really just busy work to stay on top of whatever's trendy. And it's better to, in my opinion, it's better to just focus on making code that works and trying to write it in an understandable, expressive way. I see the value of having guidelines, especially when you have a bigger team. But I do think you have to be very judicious when adopting guidelines, because every guideline that you enforce imposes sort of, I guess, creativity constraints. Carlos says, greetings from Brazil. I've recently introduced non-null pointers in the C++ codebase at work, partially inspired by seeing in Serenity. Where did you see it for the first time? I don't know. The first time I saw it, I think, was when I was working on WebKit, and I think I invented it for WebKit. Of course, I know now that it existed elsewhere, but I wanted something in WebKit because I observed that we had a lot of pointers that were not null. They were never going to be null. So I wanted a way to encapsulate that in the type system. So in WebKit, it says right here, Andreas Klein created a related class template, ref, which works with refputter, blah, blah, blah. So ref is in WebKit what we in SerenityOS call non-null refputter. And that's the first time that I saw them, I guess. And then since then, of course, I've heard about them existing in other places, but there was sort of a time in WebKit where it was really frustrating to a lot of people that we were using pointers for everything. So there was very little use of references, and we had a lot of code in WebKit that was let me get I'll get a text editor here. That was like it looked something like this: if not frame, return. This was not the right editor to use for this. It's not highlighting or tabbing the way I want. Return. And then thing. Return. So we had a lot of code that just looked like this at the start of every function. And people just kept repeating this over and over throughout the code base. So this was everywhere. And very few people knew, for example, that like, well, the frame always has a document. Like the document pointer in the frame, I mean, I'm just, this is a hypothetical example, in WebKit that's not actually true, but this thing would never be null. But nobody knew that except a small group of people who actually hacked on frame. So everybody just kept null checking it, even though it was never going to be null. And I spent a bunch of time locating situations like that and then making them return references, which allowed us to remove such things, right? So the code would look like that instead. And then maybe through some refactoring, you could also ensure that the document will also have a thing. Maybe it didn't originally, but then we changed the code a bit so that it always did. So then you could remove that check as well and just go ahead and use the thing. And then maybe your code would end up looking something like that instead. And that's sort of the first time that I got into this non-null, encoding non-nullness in the type system. Came from that. Let's see. Jason L says, 2 years of experience aren't needed for the spreadsheet contributions. Odds are you can jump right in. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It really depends on what you want to do, right? So I think maybe I was being a little hypocritical there, because I was talking about, I was responding to the question about like, what does it take to engage with operating systems development? And then I talked about what I think is required to engage with like writing a kernel from scratch. Whereas I actually don't think that's all there is to operating systems development. So I was being inconsistent with that. You can absolutely work on SerenityOS with less than 2 years of experience, But again, I do think you will have a significantly less frustrating time the more experience you have. Let's see. Randy Orton says, how much have you earned till this with the SerenityOS project? How much have I earned? You mean like how much have I received in donations? I don't have that number handy, but it has been enough to survive, which has been really good. But it's not enough that I'm not looking at the prices of everything. So there's definitely room for more comfort. But I mean, just the fact that I'm able to survive on donations to the SerenityOS project is amazing. And I'm so grateful that people believe in me and what I do enough that they want to support me in it. So far it's going well, and support keeps increasing slowly but steadily. So I'm really excited about that. And I don't know where it will go in the future, but I'm gonna hold on to I guess I'm gonna hold on to the dream of doing it full time as long as I can. And if that doesn't work out long term, then it doesn't. But I'm still gonna work on Serenity. I'll just have to do something else to support myself. But being able to do it full time, of course, is just amazing. And I am super grateful that for everybody who's helping me do that. So thank you. Let's see, Kevin, Kain Name. Oh, I was saying Kevin, but no. Kain Name says, have you read about the design of the NT kernel? If yes, what do you think about it? I haven't read much about it. I watched an interview with Dave Cutler. There's a fantastic 2-video interview with Dave Cutler, who's the original architect of Windows NT, here. And I will link this because this is so freaking good. I enjoyed this so much, just hearing about the history. So there's a part 2 to that. That's just the first one. And I super recommend that if you want to know about the history of VMS and Windows NT and Windows 2000 and all that stuff. But I haven't read specifically about the design of the NT kernel, although I do have a book about it somewhere that I never opened. Even though I never read books, I still purchase books sometimes and then not read them, which is a bit weird. Like if I see a book, like an interesting looking book that's like $2, sometimes I just buy it thinking, I'll read that eventually, and then eventually I will, maybe. Venkatesh says, my internet decided to not work properly. Well, at least this message came through, so hello there. Oh, thank you, Frederick, for the super chat. In case the keyboard breaks, he says. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That is, that's definitely enough to replace this keyboard. I think that's exactly what I paid for it. So thank you, Frederick. Very nice. Let's see. Oh, wait, I'm getting far behind again. Michael says, I like the hacking videos, but I'm also interested in your recovery story. If it's not too intrusive, could you tell us how you met your wife? Have you known her from back then? That's not really something that I would talk about on the YouTube channel at this stage, but there is a meme about how there will be a wife reveal at 1 million subscribers, so we'll have to reevaluate once we get to that point. But yes, I have known my wife for almost 10 years now, so we've stuck together for a long time. Hubris says, the best answer for any question about how soon on big projects is always 2 years. And when you finally reach the goal, you can say you finished 2 years ahead of schedule. There is some truth to that, I think. And it's definitely an area where at least I've perceived some change in the industry where at least like 15 years ago, I really feel like people just had a lot more unrealistic expectations that you would be able to tell them exactly when something would be finished. And nowadays, I feel like people who manage software engineers have just like learned to have more realistic expectations of how well you can really estimate engineering tasks. But that might also be because I worked at different companies for different people. I mean, for sure, there are still people who can't, for the life of them, understand why you can't estimate an engineering task down to the minute. I'm sure there are people like that, but somehow at least I've managed to escape them for a long time now. But in general, like what's the thing? Under promise and over deliver, right? That's usually the best. So give people a crappy estimate, and then when you deliver something faster, they'll be happy. It's objectively better than giving people an estimate that you can't keep and then eventually disappointing them with your inevitable failure. Jason L says, have you ever considered live streaming when you code the boring parts? I have considered that and decided not to do it. That I very specifically want to have sort of good energy, positive content on the YouTube channel. I don't want to be the type of live streamer who sits and gets frustrated with something because that's not the part of computer programming that I want to sort of, I guess, broadcast or necessarily highlight. I prefer to share sort of the good stuff where you're just working on something and you have a clear path forward and you're making progress and all the good stuff, right? And I mean, we all know that there's a lot of sitting around and thinking or failing at things in programming, but I just never felt like that was the kind of content I wanted to make. So that's why I don't post that kind of stuff. And I guess I am a little bit concerned because I don't want to give off the sort of the idea that I don't sit around and struggle ever. Like, of course I do. Everybody does. But I also don't want to make like a 6-hour video of me struggling to get CSS boxes to align because I don't feel like that's interesting really for anybody to look at. And even if it would be interesting for somebody to look at that, I would feel guilty taking 6 hours of their time. But yeah. Ecoptic says, thanks for explaining. I'm sorry I wasn't too clear. I was wondering how are processes created in Serenity? What's the first process created, and what's the minimum requirement for running processes in user mode? Okay, processes are created. There is a process class in the kernel called process, and there is a create user process function, or try create user process. And this is the function that is invoked when we're going to make a new process at boot. So there are two ways of creating a process, and there's creating a process out of nowhere, which really only happens at boot when we create the very first process. And then, you know, we are a Unix system, so the other way of creating process is fork. Let me go ahead and do that. So let's see who calls this. Yeah, init calls this. So this is where the very first user space program is launched. You can search for try create user process. We are in a function called init stage 2 right here in init CBP. So we create one of these things, and when you create a process, it automatically creates a main thread, and it adds the thread to the scheduler queue. So all you have to do to spawn something is just create a process. And for every other process after that one, they are created by the fork syscall. So here they create a process by doing process try create. And if you're familiar with Unix, then you already know how fork works. The minimum requirement for running processes in user mode, I guess, is to have, I mean, if you're talking about x86, then the minimum requirement for user mode is that you have a ring 3 code and data selectors set up, and that you set up some kind of way to jump into that with like a task selector or something like that. It's been so long since I poked at the basics of multitasking that I forget what the things are called. But yeah, you really just need a code and data selector, and you need to store the code and data for the user space process somewhere. But again, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, how it relates to Serenity, or if you're talking about like something that you're working on. Let's see. RWXTarXD says, "Hi Andreas, if possible, can you explain how terminals work? PTTY, master, slave, etc. Or recommend a nice resource to learn more about them." Yes, I do have actually a really nice resource for you on that. Linus Åkesson has a fantastic page called the TTY Demystified, and I think you will really enjoy that. It explains in great detail about how TTYs on Linux or on Unix work, and it's impossible to read this page without learning something. So definitely check that out. And just to close the loop there, like they basically work the same on SerenityOS as described on this page. And once you know what the things are called, it will be easy to find the various corresponding C++ classes, like PTY multiplexer is a class, and then there's like a master PTY and a slave PTY, and so on. So you can find all these things once you know what they're called. And we also have sessions, process groups, stuff like that. James Pulio says, "Hey Andreas, I'll just rehash my silly question on Discord. What does WHF stand for? Wrong answers only." Wrong answers only? Well, it stands for there is a plan. I guess. That's incredibly wrong. Let's see. Hashem says, "Do you think the specifications for the standards of the web are unwieldy to prevent new bad entrants, or they're simply a product of the nature of the web?" I think they're just a product of the nature of the web and the nature of browser competition. And it's something that's getting better and better over time, but you have to remember that browser specifications have always they started out as being descriptive, right? Because browsers came out originally with no specification whatsoever. And specifications were created after the fact, sort of describing how the browsers work based on more or less reverse engineering them. And of course, over time, browser developers joined the specification groups, and they started working together on improving the specs and writing new specs for new features and so on. And nowadays it's in a pretty healthy place. And it's interesting that the stuff that's really underspecified in web specs is the really oldest stuff. So stuff like block layout, inline layout, floats, absolute positioning, things like that. A lot of that stuff is still like very vague. Tables is a big one. Although there's a new table spec draft that tries to actually clarify how tables should work. But really, all the new specs are pretty damn good, and I don't think that they're bad at all. The main grievance I have with web specs is that there are so many of them, and that they don't make unified spec. For example, like how they used to have CSS2, right? And now there's like 50 different submodules of CSS instead. Like if you go to the CSS working group or whatever website, which sometimes doesn't work. Let's see if it works today. Then they have a lot of specs. Wow, that really doesn't load very fast. And I liked it in the past when there was a single spec. I thought that was an easier thing to do or deal with. But other than that, I think the specs are good. And I don't think at all that they are unwieldy to prevent new implementations. I mean, we are doing a new implementation and the specs are not getting in our way at all. They're helping us. And but of course it helps that I come from that world. Like I've worked on browsers for, over 10 years, and I'm familiar with the landscape, so it doesn't scare me. I understand that if somebody comes into this, they've never read a web spec before, and they see like this list of things and they think, oh my goodness, I have to implement all of these things just to have CSS. And that's not exactly how it works, right? But yeah, it is sometimes frustrating. And I guess if I'm going to complain about one little detail, it would be that links between specs often don't work. So if a concept is described in one spec, or cross-references don't work. So let's see if we can find an example of that. Okay, well, this is just really slow. CSS display. And W3 schools still always on top of the Google results. I don't want to see that. So when you click on a concept here, so these links, you click on a concept link and it brings up a cross-reference index. And this is my only big grievance with these specs, is because of the multi-spec nature, you only see uses of this term within the current spec when you do this. You don't see uses in other specs, but specs link to each other everywhere, but you can't find like who links to this. And that's one of those things where you're implementing something and you're wondering like, oh, well, I wonder which spec cares about this concept and how, and you can't find it because there's no cross-reference index between specs. So my single grievance, and I have talked with the spec people about it, and they have a to-do about it. There's a bug open, but no progress at the moment as far as I can see, but hopefully they'll get to it. Anyway, that's, but I'm generally happy with the specs. I feel like they're very good. Let's see, Dave says, regarding the singleton pattern, the reason why it's considered bad is because writing unit tests can be difficult as it cannot be mocked. Yeah, okay, sure. I mean, I guess that's an issue sometimes, but then you just need some way to substitute your singleton thing. I don't know, that sounds like one of those things that you can design around pretty quickly for the situations where you need it. Let's see. And then people argue about how to mock singletons and whatnot. Sure. Keyboard G says, my stack of Unreal books is my monument to my failure to have free time. Yeah. I don't know. I guess in my case, it's more like I have all these books that I didn't read yet, but I think it's more like a monument to my I'm having too much fun in my free time to stop what I'm doing and read a book instead. But I've been in the other situation too, so I know how it's like. Marco Santos says, hi, had my first interaction with pre-commit while working on something for Serenity. It's a very handy tool. Yes, I definitely recommend people use pre-commit hooks. It's a very, very handy tool indeed. Sophia says, you skipped my question, the thing about BIOS stuff. Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes I skip over a bunch of questions because I miss things. I'm not reading perfectly. Sorry about that. Sophia says, when making a kernel, how much do you need to communicate/deal with the BIOS? Is it like a sort of API, or more does it kind of disappear from view when the OS starts? Yeah, so the BIOS is like, I mean, essentially like 16-bit legacy at this point. And there are some functions in the BIOS that are relevant to modern operating systems, but quite few. So in many ways, it does disappear when you switch into protected or long mode. You can no longer call into the BIOS from protected or long mode anyway, because it's 16-bit code, and all of the entry points into the BIOS code are in the 16-bit interrupt vector table, so you can't even call them. There's no way to call that code once you go 32 or 64-bit mode. But of course, there are mechanisms to sort of drop back down into 16-bit real mode, call into the BIOS. I know I think Linux does that for things like setting the video mode via BIOS. There's some way to like drop down to real mode very temporarily, make a BIOS call in and come back into protected mode. And it's actually something we might want to do for Serenity, just to be able to switch the video mode on bare metal. But it's not something we have looked into seriously yet. Alex Major says, wife lives in Canada, right? She's not real. Right, yeah. My wife goes to another school, but she's totally real. Jacob Sinclair says, I'm working on a programming language/environment that works well for my own use cases. Once I got everything up and running, I'm going to try porting it to Serenity and see how it goes. Cool. That's definitely going to be a journey for you to get it working on SerenityOS. Thomas Q says, how much inspiration does Serenity take from Rust? I've seen loads of similar patterns in the hacking videos. Not super much, some, but not super much, I guess. I've written Rust, not super much, but some, and obviously I'm a big fan of the question mark operator that they have for error propagation, and I wish we could have that in C++, but we can't. So we have our try macro. That is very nice, but outside of that, I don't think there's anything that's sort of directly influenced by Rust in Serenity. Andrew says, I think expectations on engineering time really depends on the industry. I've been fighting that all month at dollar job. It's so hard to give a reasonable estimate. Yes, it really is hard. It really, really is hard. Naveed says, are you working full-time on SerenityOS? If so, how you made that happen? I would like to know about your experience as a person who works mainly on his own open source project for a living, if that's true. Yes, I am working full-time on SerenityOS, and I've been doing that for almost a year now, coming up in May, and I wrote a blog post about it when I quit my previous job, just describing what led up to that. So I'll link that in the chat if you want to read that. And my experience doing that full-time so far is that it's been really great. And the main difference between working on it part-time or in my spare time and working on it full-time is that I find myself doing a lot more like large, complicated tasks, whereas previously I tried to stick to like small, easily digestible tasks most of the time. But now that I have my full-time available for this, I can spend like 8 straight hours just debugging something or refactoring something or re-architecting something. And I don't run out of energy like I would in the past when I had a day job and then I would come home and, you know, spend 3-4 hours working on Serenity. It was just much harder to engage with long, big tasks. But it's a very, very satisfying pursuit, and I'm really, really happy, and I feel very fortunate to be able to do it, and I definitely don't take it for granted, and I don't imagine it would last forever. So every day I just try to think of it as like a blessing, I guess, that I get to do this for one more day. And yeah, if you have other specific questions about it, I'm happy to answer. Jörg says, thank you for making your dream come true. Great project. Thank you. I'll familiarize myself with it. I hope I can add something soon. Oh, well, that's a very nice sentiment. Thank you, Jörg. I think you will absolutely find something you can add to it or improve. That's one of the great strengths about the system, I feel like, is that it's nicely polished in many ways, but it's also unpolished enough that everybody can find some way to improve it that appeals to them. Hubris says, with Serenity's Vaporwave-esque aesthetic, somebody should make a mod tracker for it. Ah, somebody. Well, that's a dirty word, my friend. How about you do a mod tracker, if you would like to see a mod tracker? Ecoptic says, thank you so much for taking your time to explain it. I'm a beginner and you inspired me to start working on an operating system, and the current plan is to be able to run processes. That's a good plan. Ecoptic, like you said, it's really frustrating for a beginner, but these streams make it a little easier. Yeah, exactly. It is a frustrating thing to engage with, the less experience you have, but you can push through it, right? Even if you are new to programming, you've only been doing it for 2 years or so, you can still plow your way through operating systems development. And because if it's the most interesting thing in the world to you, just force your way through it. You don't have to wait. Just saying it would sometimes be easier to wait. But if you're enjoying it, then more power to you, my friend. Robert Beekman says, what is your second favorite JavaScript API? My second favorite JavaScript API? I don't know. That's such a strange question. My second favorite JavaScript API. I guess I enjoy the with. It's not really an API, but I enjoy the with keyword in JavaScript. I think it's kind of funny. You know, where you sort of bring the properties of an object into the current local scope. So you say like with some expression, and then the result of this expression is sort of becomes a new environment, and then you can access properties as variables directly within the statement here. That's one of those things that like really fell out of favor. Everybody recommends to not use it, but I find it kind of cute. So, and not strictly an API, but maybe my second favorite JavaScript feature. Let's see. Hubris says, all right, I got to start work now. Goodbye, friends. Enjoy your day at work, Hubris. Let's see. Mahendra says, make a wallpaper use program. Is it possible? I'm not sure exactly what you mean. You mean like a wallpaper selector? So if you right click on the desktop and choose display settings, you do get this thing where you can select wallpapers. But it could absolutely be better. We could have a much nicer widget than this teensy tiny thumbnail one, right? But it's one of those things where incremental improvement is very nice. So a better wallpaper chooser would be an awesome feature to have. It's absolutely possible. And you can even do it yourself if you would like to work on improving this somehow. I know the wallpaper selector that they have in Mate, like the old GNOME one, is pretty cool. Like you see bigger wallpapers like that. But I don't know. guess you have to try messing around with it, see what you come up with. Let's see. PH says, "Hey Andreas, not asking for a plan, but do you have things you wish people were working on in Serenity because you don't have the time to?" No, not at all. I'm just really happy that people work on things that they want to work on, and I don't want to ever tell anybody what to do. I really, really just want people to do the thing that they're interested in, because I want the whole system to consist of stuff that people built while having fun, while enjoying themselves, right? While engaging with that stupid, nerdy love for programming. And if I were to tell people, oh, I wish you would do this, or I wish you would do that, I feel like that would just erode the pleasant purity of what we have today. So I just never tell anybody what to do. But of course, sometimes it's nice to share. It's nice to try to bait people into doing something that you think might be cool, but like never instruct anybody or tell anybody outright what they should be doing. So because of that, like I don't even have any ideas for what I would have people do. I just wait and see what people end up doing, and there isn't really anything that I'm not happy to work on myself. So, and I've also never been in a situation where I didn't know what to do. So, if that ever happens, maybe I'll have to rethink this. Yash says, "No question, but proud of everything and community." Well, I agree. I'm also proud of everything, especially the community. What a community it is. Bunch of lovely people. Islam says, "Hi, Andreas. First time on live." Hello. Welcome, Islam. Glad to see you here. Yapros says, "Is the image that you use on your thumbnails a picture of you as a child or some random stock image?" It is a picture of me as a child. Can you believe it? This is me. I think I was 9 or 10 years old. I'm not exactly sure when the picture was taken, but based on this computer, which I think belonged to my father's workplace, and he took it home for a few days. Based on that, I think I was 10 maybe, and this is just what I looked like as a child. I was struggling with some programming thing. I'm holding a mouse, so it was probably Visual Basic at the time. And I don't know, I just really like this picture because this is, I don't know, this is just the type of, this is the person I was as a child, and I lost track of that kid for a while growing up, but now I've just been doing everything I can to get back to this person, to being this person, and I feel like I actually managed to get back there. And now I'm just like a little kid enjoying programming again and being happy about life. Ecoptic says, "What's your fourth favorite JavaScript API?" I don't know. Linus says, "Any thoughts on the MDN redesign?" Oh, yeah, topical. I don't know if I have thoughts about it. I guess I appreciate that they put in this dark mode, light mode, switchy, swatchy thing. That is nice of them. I don't know that it's better or worse. It feels like a complete side grade to me. Like they just moved stuff around, because the two most important things to me on MDN are like the first blurb of text here, which I read super fast just to figure out what something is, and then I scroll down and I want to have a link to the spec. And that's because I find that the easiest way to find the specification document or the relevant specification for some web feature is usually through MDN, because if you Google for like some API in the web, it usually doesn't, Google doesn't tell you which spec to look at. They just find you a bunch of blogs of like how to use this or cool CSS tricks you can do with this or that. But if I go through MDN, I know they have the spec links for almost everything. So this is like my killer feature of MDN. In fact, if I were to redesign MDN, I would put the spec link right here, like right under the name of the page, because I think it's the single most important feature on the whole site. But as far as the redesign goes, I guess it's fine, you know, whatever. Let's see if it works on Serenity though. I have not tested this. Let's test it out right now. Developermozilla.org/ you know what, I'm going to type the whole URL and we'll see what we get. All right, come on now, don't crash. Oh, okay, not super awful, but definitely also not super correct. We are missing the navigation pane. Also, we have a bunch of white space over here, and there are issues. But yeah, we're gonna have to work on that. So can I switch it into dark mode somehow? I don't know what I'm even clicking on over here. Oh, wait, don't we have a thing for that? Color scheme, dark. Did that do anything? Oh, it did. Oh, cool. That's pretty cool. So it actually respects, or our browser understands if you put it into dark mode. That's awesome. But yeah, it needs work on layout for sure. Jonathan Marler says, what things are left for you to use Serenity to develop Serenity? I don't know that anything in particular is left, but for me personally, I'm just gonna switch when it's more convenient to use Serenity rather than using Linux. Right now, Linux offers me more convenience, but eventually it will get to the point where Serenity offers me more convenience, so I'll just use that. I'm very pragmatic in that way. So it's not like I have a list of things that need to work. It's just a matter of like one being more convenient than the other. So right now, like I can record videos and watch YouTube on Linux. Can't do that on Serenity. I have reliable multi-core compile on Linux. That's not reliable on Serenity. So some stuff like that. Let's see. Luke says, I like how event handler attributes seemingly the only other thing that uses with, and it's implicit. Yeah, event handler attributes are amazing. Alan says, can I write apps in Qt for SerenityOS? Do you want for I and other developers to write documentation for SerenityOS? So you can write applications in Qt and compile them for SerenityOS. In theory, there is a port of Qt. And everybody is certainly welcome to write documentation for the system if they want to. It's just one of many ways that you can improve the system. If you feel like you would like to write documentation, nobody's going to stop you. The one thing I will say about writing apps in Qt is that while you can certainly do that, we will never put like applications with third-party dependencies into the main system. They will only ever be ports because the whole system is meant to be self-contained. So our base system does not have any hard dependencies on third-party stuff. Everything has to be first-party hard dependencies, but there are some instances where like we can detect if you have some third-party thing installed, and then we can make use of that as a feature, as an optional feature. But like a Qt application is not going to be part of Serenity proper. Linus says, fun-driven development is the best, for sure, for sure. Ecoptic says, I learned C myself, and today in uni we learned C, and there was the auto keyword. I literally never saw it was used and didn't know it existed. Yeah, the auto in C means something totally different than auto in C++. Robert Beekman says, Counter-Strike flashbang on Andreas's face when disabling dark mode. Indeed. That's it's always like that when you're in a dark room and bringing up some really bright thing on the screen. It's always jarring, but what are you gonna do? I noticed that we don't invalidate the page automatically. Is it only on resize? Oh, okay. So we can improve this. We need to force out some kind of invalidation of that. I guess maybe it's a media query that needs to get reevaluated or something. Sophia says, side grade is a very fun word. Yeah, side grade is great. Oh, okay. Wait, here's a name I don't know how to pronounce. Bear with me. Oh, it's Igor again. Oh, I thought I learned how that was written. That last letter threw me off. Well, Igor says, how do I start reading and understanding an existing code base? I think one of my best tips for reading and familiarizing yourself with the new code base is to make it interactive rather than just passive. So instead of just reading code, try to actively modify the code and make sure you build the code locally and then add stuff to it, like add little print statements and stuff so that you can sort of validate your understanding of what you're reading by seeing that it prints out what you would expect to see. That's often what I do if I want to understand, like, say I want to understand, like, why does Firefox lay out a page in a certain way? Well, instead of just reading the Firefox code, I find it much more productive to like open the code, put in some print statements here and there, and just see if it's flowing through the program in the way that I imagine. So that is often my big tip about like for code reading, to make it interactive rather than just passive. But how do I start doing it? I don't really know how to start. You just have to start somewhere, anywhere, really. I think all different approaches work, and everybody finds the approach that works for them. Like, you can try to find sort of the main entry point of the program and start there, or you can find some like detail in some subsystem and then work your way up from there. I guess maybe my advice would be to start wherever you think you understand stuff the most, or which part you have the most experience with, perhaps as a user. So if you wanted to understand Photoshop and you really like using the clone tool, maybe you would start by looking at how the clone tool is implemented and then starting out from there. So like take advantage of that sort of built-in intuitive understanding of a feature that you have in your head already and see how it maps to code and then branch out from there. Sam Atkins says, hi Sam, by the way. Sam says, I found MDN kept crashing for me the other day, but that was on pages with the live examples in Serenity, that is. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was crashing. There are definitely crashers in our browser. But I think based on how decent it already looks, I feel like we should be able to get this to a pretty good place without super much trouble. Fingers crossed. I mean, of course, it depends on what's actually missing. What kind of layout is this anyway? Is it a flex layout? Flexy grid? Oh, it's a CSS grid. Yeah, we don't have anything for grid yet, so it'll take a bit of work to get that working. Yep. But we'll get there. Raflemacht says, do you have a favorite software design pattern? I recently found out about finite state machines, and they made my Arduino programs much easier to grow, profile, and debug. A favorite software design pattern. I don't know that I do. I feel like when it comes to design patterns, you don't really want to have like a single favorite one, because then you'll just find yourself using it everywhere, even where it's not appropriate. Um, I think more healthy approach is to have a favorite like 10 patterns, or like a repertoire of useful patterns. Um, but I mean, I understand the nature of your question. So like, what's my most toppest pattern? But I don't know that I have an answer. I guess I don't really rank them like that. I just think of them as little tools that we have at our disposal to make code more flexible, reusable, and expressive. And the older I get, I mean, when I was younger, I used to think a lot about design patterns, but as I get older and more experienced, I guess I think in more abstract terms, even more abstract than design patterns, and I think more about making programs that are really expressive, and that's sort of where the real magic of patterns is. If you can figure out ways to make your programs self-explanatory and really expressive, really my own ideal for code is if you read it out in English, it should sort of make sense to a person listening, even if they can't see the code. If you can read a piece of code to somebody just by reading out the keywords and the identifiers, and if the person listening can actually understand what the code does, I feel like that's a really strong piece of code. And if you look around Serenity, you often see the code written in such a way. Some parts less than others, but it's kind of an ideal that I personally strive for, that the code should be really readable and just understandable as English, where it doesn't obviously interfere with your ability to express what the code should actually do. Let's see. Thomas Q says, is the request server bug fixed when it hangs and uses 100% of the CPU? Yes, that bug was fixed by Ali. And now it doesn't do that. And now I haven't actually loaded Discord for a few days, so I don't know what state it's in. I probably broke the layout a little bit. I've been working a lot on CSS2 stuff, so like blocks and inlines, and just kind of ignoring the fallout and regressions in Flexbox, because Flexbox is a little bit incorrectly implemented, because it doesn't know how to deal with auto sizes, so it doesn't understand what to do with intrinsically sized objects or items. And yeah, you can see here that some stuff has shifted to the left a little bit. That's something that we have to fix. But the bug which we often saw with Discord, where it would just get hung, that has been fixed. Yes, very, very nice. Andrew says, I saw you post on Twitter about getting Serenity into that Interop 2022 thing. Has anyone run the numbers yet for where browser score is on that thing? I wonder what the ballpark is. Right, so I posted about this earlier today. There's a new thing called Interop 2022, which is, let me find it. It's this thing that the major browser vendors are doing together, where they've sort of identified a set of web platform features that are important to web developers, and they're going to coordinate and work together on making sure that these features work well in all the browsers. And I think that sounded like a really good effort. And it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do feel like it's something that we should eventually be able to get into once we are at of course, a much higher degree of web compatibility. But to answer your question, I don't think anybody has run the numbers yet on our browser. There was a discussion last night where Ali was talking there was somebody from the Google Chrome team in our browser channel talking about how they run the tests on Google Chrome, and they were discussing like how we could do the same thing for Serenity, but I don't know if anything happened with that. I went to sleep in the middle of it, and But I guess I would say like it's sort of, there's a seed there, and there's some stuff happening, but we don't have a number yet as far as I know. Valtteri says, visiting my new Helsinki apartment for the first time right now. Lovely place. First thing I did was set up my LAN, of course. Right. And the second thing you did was join office hours. So welcome to your new apartment. That sounds really nice. I know Valtteri got a new job recently, and apparently he's now moving to a lovely place. So very good to see people in the community making improvements to their life. Congratulations on that. James says, regarding making code understandable, make expressive types, method names, variable member names. Look at release value, but fix me should propagate errors. Right, that's one of our most obnoxious names, and I just love it because it's so obnoxious that when you see that, you just kind of cringe and you feel like, should I really use this? Because then I have to look at this. Maybe I should just suck it up and propagate the errors, right? So it's a very effective thing. Let's see. Alex says, what processor and GPU are you using on your main machine? I am using, let's find out, LS CPU. This is an Intel i9 9900K, one of these things. And the graphics card I'm using is an NVIDIA something or other. This one right here, an RTX 2060, which I picked up last year to offload my machine while I was recording videos, and oops, now I'm resizing the wrong window, dang it. It was a very, very good thing to have, because before that my machine would just get real busy with the CPU encoding while recording videos. Yes, it's an RTX 2060, and the CPU is a 9900K. Hope that answers your question. I'm not the most... I don't talk a lot about computer parts because I rarely deal with them. But it's working really well, I would say. Sauler says, why table view does not show headers when there is no content in it? I don't know exactly how to interpret that question. Why table view doesn't show headers? It doesn't? I think, I don't know. You would have to give me an example or something to look at. That's certainly not intentional. If you have a table view and you've set the headers to be visible and they don't show up just because there are no data rows in the table model, then that's a bug. So we should fix that. X7D says, how's IPv6 support in Serenity? Very lacking. Lots of room for improvement. Let's see. Igor says, do you think voice coding tools like Serenade have future? I don't know. What's Serenade voice coding? I think these type of things are amazing, and I hope that they have a future. I'm really glad that there are people who work on stuff like voice coding, because while I don't need it personally right now, there may come a day when I do, right? Because you never know what happens in life. Maybe something happens to my vision, or maybe I get my eyes poked out by something. Or for whatever reason, I end up needing voice coding tools. And I really hope that there's a future for things like this. And I'm happy that there are those who work on them. I saw a demo of somebody doing voice coding on one of the Zig Showtime episodes, I think it was. Zig Showtime voice coding. It was a Swedish guy doing it. Coding by voice in Zig. Yeah. This was a pretty cool demo. I'll link it in the chat. Dun dun dun. Let's see. Galaxy says, what do you reckon the minimum hardware requirements will be for Serenity OS? I don't really know. I guess it's hard to say because it's ultimately the system is made by its own developers for its own developers. So really the minimum hardware requirement is that you have the same hardware as the developers. But of course the hack to get out of that situation if you don't have the hardware is to become a developer and make it work on your own hardware, which is ultimately what I want to encourage everybody to do. But in more practical terms, I think we do want to allow ourselves to not have to work on a really old computer, right? I don't want the system to be held back by being forced to work on a machine from 1985, right? And then you just have to, I don't know if there's a hard requirement. It's more like there would probably be some kind of line where if you have less than this much machine, the experience will degrade. I guess that's the best way of thinking about it, but I don't think we need to draw any hard lines anywhere, like, oh, it doesn't work unless you have this or that. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know how to answer that well. See, Jonathan says, going blind and not being able to program is my worst fear. It is spooky, right? Definitely not something I wish for anybody. But evidently there are people who do program while blind, and I find that awesome. And I'm interested in it, but I haven't yet been interested enough to just take the time to learn how to do it or even try it out. Maybe I should, because it is really cool. So yeah, I am glad that there are tools. Anyway, Sauler was saying that you can check storage inspector. There is no headers when site does not have any cookies. Okay, so this page doesn't have a cookie, right? Where is the storage inspector? Right here. But there's a header right here. I mean, oh. What happened here? Oh, well, I guess I clicked on something I shouldn't click on. Seems like we have a bug there in the table view that I found just by frantically clicking around. So I guess what you mean is that there are no columns in the header. So this thing here is the header view widget, but it's not displaying any columns. And why is that? Maybe we don't, well, anyway, that's a bug. So that just needs to be debugged. If you have columns and we're not showing, I'll open up Google, which I'm sure sets cookie of some type. Yeah, okay, yeah. So you're expecting to see this name, value, domain, blah, 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 but you don't if there are no rows in the data model. That's a bug. Debug it, fix it. That's what we gotta do. Alex Major says, ice poked out, take the spoon out of your tea to be safe. Yeah, I never put a spoon in my tea. That's too dangerous. But I do leave the bag in there permanently. Let's see. Robert Beekman says, how do you balance end user questions with coding yourself? I run an open source project and I find offering support one of the biggest downsides, and I feel bad about that. Right. I guess I've put myself in a situation where I don't have to deal with end users because SerenityOS explicitly excludes non-developer users. Like, we are not meant for non-developer users. It's made for ourselves, by ourselves. So everybody who comes to the project is in some ways a developer. Now that doesn't mean you have to be a programmer, but you are expected to fix your own problems, basically, whether that's done by like helping somebody else fix a bug or like doing the work yourself, but some amount of autonomy is expected, I guess. We don't have this culture where you can just put a feature request in the bug tracker and something will happen. In fact, what will happen is it probably will just close the issue. And I know that that doesn't work for every project. And certainly if you would like to grow your user base, then you can't necessarily afford to have this kind of attitude. But in our case, I feel like our project works better because we just require that everybody be able to autonomously get the system to do what they want somehow. So how do I balance it? I mean, if I stop being so specific about it and just imagine like more in the abstract of what you're asking, like how do I balance helping people with what they want to do versus with spending time on what I want to do? I don't know. I guess I try to prioritize what I want to do most of the time, but every now and then check up on what other people are working on and see if there's some way I can help them along, or if somebody is sort of heading in a direction that's maybe unproductive or what I would consider not ideal for the project, then I can spend some time on getting them on the right track again. But most of the time, I want to let people do things for themselves so that they get to make all the decisions, and I just get to trust them and see that they shape the system in ways that they enjoy without me telling them what to do. I don't know, I feel like I'm meandering a little bit in this answer, but it's hard to answer from my perspective because of our unusual situation where we don't have end users. I need to think more about that, I guess. Igor says, I heard somebody managed to run SerenityOS on ThinkPad T42. Very possible. I don't know who that was, but should be doable, I guess. I mean, in theory, it should run on anything. It just needs a little bit of elbow grease. Nicholas says, maybe if you disable QEMU optimizations and cut off RAM, we can see how SerenityOS works in a limited environment. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. I mean, you can just run without KVM, for example. So turn off hardware virtualization and you will immediately get a worse experience. And now we'll just take a time. Yeah. So now we're running on the QEMU JIT rather than the virtualization layer of my host CPU. So definitely already a bit slower. Launching programs takes sweet time. Click. Waity. There it is. Yeah, so you can, if you turn off KVM, you can already see a slowed down version of Serenity. Now, why you would want to do that, I don't know, but you can. Simonish says, are you playing Elden Ring? Not yet, but somebody was nice enough to give me a copy of the game the other day, so I am very grateful for that. And I'm definitely going to be playing it now. Originally, I was going to wait, maybe wait for it to come out. Maybe there would be like a sale or something, but somebody gave me a copy of the game, so now I just have to play it instead. So definitely gonna do that. But I haven't tried it yet. Sophia says, it would be interesting to compare the performance of Win95, 98, 2000, and Serenity. Yes, that could be interesting, I guess, on equivalent hardware. Yeah. I don't know which one would do better. I feel like the older Windows systems jump through a lot of hoops to like do stuff like draw as little as possible on screen and like only draw pixels where something changed and stuff like that. Whereas we are, we're pretty willing to just spackle pixels over and over. But yeah, it could be an interesting little thing to investigate. Thomas Q says, with the codebase getting larger and larger, do you plan to separate components in different repos, like having a repo just for the browser? No. I think the way we're doing it now is working absolutely beautifully. Like the fact that we can update everything atomically is too good to give up. And I don't see any benefits to breaking it into multiple repositories. And certainly none that would outweigh the benefits from having everything in a single repository. Sophia says, I guess it's good to have a platform where users help each other. Yes, absolutely. That works really well in a developer-only project like Serenity as well, because developers help each other just naturally, because like somebody starts talking about some problem they're having and somebody else will just join the conversation and say like, oh, well, I had this problem and I did this or that and blah, blah, blah. I think in essence, people are really helpful creatures. Humans are, I mean. We just want to see others succeed. And if we figure something out, we want to help others who are having the same problem. So that seems to work really well. And it's one of those things where I'm really glad that we have our Discord server. I mean, not because of Discord specifically, but because it's so good to have a place where people can chat about a project. If all we had were the GitHub bug tracker and like that's how people would communicate about these things, I feel like we would miss out on so much cross-developer synergy or whatever. But now where people can just have casual conversation and share stuff with each other, a lot of things get fixed just from that happening. That's been really nice. Thomas Q said, at some point cloning it will take a lot of time. Sure, but that's like not really a concern. Cloning 2 repositories will also take a lot of time if you split it into 2 repositories. I'm not sure. Not sure if cloning 2 would be any faster than cloning 1. Ecoptic says, we need to see Andreas streaming Elden Ring. I'm not sure if you need to see that. I feel like, based on my experience with the other From Software games, going to be a lot of me dying and saying, okay, which isn't necessarily the vibe I want to put on the internet. But who knows? We'll see. Maybe it turns out I'm just a natural at this one. But certainly in the Dark Souls games, I had to spend a lot of time learning not to die. Laurinas says, do you have plans for tomorrow? No, I don't really have any plans for tomorrow, if you can believe it. James says, one good reason to turn off KVM is to reproduce continuous integration flakes. Yes, that's absolutely true. Our continuous integration system runs without KVM, so that's really the primary reason that anybody turns off KVM, is to try to reproduce bugs that are appearing on CI. Because sometimes we get these problems that only show up on CI, nobody can reproduce locally, but then you turn off KVM locally and you get the bug as well. So yeah, there is a use case, you're right. Of course, I wish that our CI would allow us to run with KVM, but it doesn't. Igor says, are there Macintosh-inspired elements in SerenityOS? Yes. There are many. For example, we have in our browser, for example, a lot of the windows that we have, like Storage Inspector, which we talked about earlier. The inspector concept is really an old macOS concept, as far as I know, where you have like these little windows that sort of logically inspect something about another window. So this is a storage inspector tied to this window. This is something that you find all over macOS. These inspectors, and I really like that UI concept where you have an inspector that tells you more about some object that another window is showing, and they move around with the window. I'm not completely sure that this is a good idea, by the way, but right now they do this. When you drag it, it's kind of strange. But that's just one example of macOS inspiration. Ankit says, why is it most of the colleges here teach C++ and Turbo C++? Wow. I was not aware of that. It wouldn't have surprised me 20 years ago, but now it's a little bit surprising, I guess. I suppose, no, I don't think there's any good reason to teach Turbo C++ at this point, because Turbo C++, if we're talking about the same Turbo C++, they're like really far behind in standards support. So what you're learning is like a very, very outdated, outmoded form of C++. But maybe there's a more modern version that I don't know about. Turbo C++. What's the latest version of that? A discontinued C++ compiler, last version 2006. All right, so it's definitely outdated, right? Even if you're using the version from 2006, that's still like 5 years before C++ 11. Oof. Small oof there. I don't know why they do that. I think if you're being taught Turbo C++ right now, then do yourself a favor and pick up a more modern compiler. There are many free ones to choose from, and learn a little bit more about more modern C++. Tommy Tomastini says, would you need a beep button streaming you die in Elden Ring? That might be necessary. I don't usually curse when I play games, but sometimes like a little bit of smoke comes out my ears, and I'm hesitant to broadcast that onto the world. I think that's not a vibe that I need to share with anybody. Thomas Q says, regarding separating repositories, the idea of splitting repositories is that if someone wants to work in the kernel, they wouldn't have to get the whole browser too. Yes, but I don't want to give people that convenience because it sacrifices the value of the monorepo for a theoretical minor convenience of somebody having to check out less code. That's absolutely not worth it, in my opinion. Andrew says, if someone can get us some nice build bots that have nested virtualization enabled, we could avoid that KVM hassle. But no, KVM finds all the fun race conditions. Yeah, that's true. It is good to run without KVM because it does expose issues that KVM hides by being too fast, so that is good. And, oh shit, I'm out of time, actually. I need to get going. So last question here is from Igor, who says, what do you think about experimental operating systems like Oberon, Plan 9, TempleOS, and other unusual things? I don't really have a strong opinion about these systems, one way or the other, but I am happy that they exist, and I think it's nice that people make things that are experimental. It's not something I'm personally interested in doing. I'm not trying to build an experimental thing that might or might not pan out. I'm trying to build something completely practical that I want to use, that I can use, and I'm putting all of my energy towards building something that is usable, not just cool, I guess, or interesting, but actually usable. Everybody has different priorities. Everybody has different goals. My goal is to build something that I can use. So that's what we end up with around here. Anyways, thank you all very much for coming to Office Hours. I really appreciate the questions, the company, the super chats, and as I like to say, if you are going to work on SerenityOS this weekend, then come to the Discord server and share what you're working on. I'm sure people would love to hear about it, and if you run into trouble, that's where you'll find all the people who can help you debug. Outside of that, I'm just going to see all of you next time. So have a great weekend. Bye.